The wind whipped dust cut across the barren streets of Trinity, Texas, like the harsh memories that had carved themselves into Hannah Downing's face. At 28, her eyes held the weariness of someone who had lived several lifetimes, each one harder than the last. The year was 1878, and while the rest of the country spoke of progress and prosperity, Hannah knew only loss and survival as she stepped down from the stagecoach that had carried her to this remote frontier town. "Madam, your luggage," the driver called out, holding a single worn carpetbag. It contained everything she owned in the world now: a few dresses, her mother's hairbrush, and the deed to a small property left by her late uncle. A property she'd never seen but desperately needed to be her salvation. Hannah took the bag with a nod, not bothering to force a smile. Her cheeks had forgotten that movement months ago, perhaps years. The relentless Texas sun beat down as she surveyed Trinity's dusty Main Street, a handful of weathered buildings, a livery stable, the obligatory saloon, and what appeared to be a general store. Nothing like the bustling Chicago streets she'd left behind, along with the ashes of her former life. "First time in Trinity?" The driver's question broke through her thoughts. "Yes," she answered simply, her voice as dry as the surrounding landscape. "Town's small, but decent folk mostly. Sheriff Mallory keeps order. General store there," he pointed to a weathered building with a wide porch, "belongs to old man Peterson. He's fair with his prices." Hannah nodded again, clutching the deed paper in her pocket. "And the land office, end of the street next to the bank." Though both close early on Thursdays. He checked his pocket watch, which would be about 20 minutes ago. Hannah felt the weight of disappointment add to her exhaustion. Another night without answers, without settlement. "Hotel's just there," the driver continued, pointing to a 2-story building with peeling white paint. "Mrs. Holloway runs it. Clean beds, fair rates." "Thank you," Hannah said, already calculating how many nights her meager savings would afford her. As she took her first steps toward the hotel, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her turn. A tall man on a chestnut stallion rode down the main street, drawing the eyes of everyone around. He sat straight in the saddle with an easy confidence that spoke of countless hours on horseback. His broad shoulders were draped in a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt, and a hat pulled low shielded his face from the harsh sun. The rider slowed as he passed Hannah, and for a brief moment their eyes met. His were a startling blue, clear and direct in a sun-weathered face. Something in that gaze, perhaps curiosity, perhaps simple acknowledgement, lingered before he tipped his hat slightly and continued on his way. "That's Zachary Quinn," the stagecoach driver said, noticing her attention. "Owns the Double Circle Ranch north of town. Good man in a tough spot. Lost his brother in the war, parents to fever few years back. Runs that spread all on his own now." Hannah turned away. She had no interest in another person's story of loss. Her own was burden enough. With resolute steps, she headed toward the hotel, the deed to her uncle's property feeling impossibly heavy in her pocket. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring. Tonight, she needed rest. Mrs. Holloway's hotel proved to be, as promised, clean if sparse. The room Hannah took was small, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair by the window that overlooked the main street. As darkness fell over Trinity, she watched the few lamps being lit along the street, casting pools of yellow light against the gathering gloom. The town seemed to shut down early, with only the saloon showing signs of life as night settled in. Hannah unpacked her few belongings and laid out her plainest dress for tomorrow. The land office would be her first stop, then perhaps finding whatever remained of her uncle's property. Whether it was a habitable home or simply a plot of dusty earth remained to be seen. She sat by the window for a long while, the waning light painting shadows across her face. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman she barely recognized anymore, hair once full and lustrous now pulled back severely. Lips that used to curve easily into smiles now set in a permanent line of determination. But it was her eyes that had changed the most. Once described by her husband as dancing with light, they now held only caution and a deep, abiding wariness. Sleep came fitfully that night, broken by dreams of fire and screams that Hannah had learned to endure but never escape. By dawn, she was already dressed and ready to face whatever this day in Trinity might bring. The land office opened precisely at 8 o'clock, its proprietor a balding man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers who introduced himself as Mr. Pemberton. He examined her deed with professional detachment. "Harold Downing was your uncle, you say?" "Yes," Hannah confirmed. "My father's brother. I never met him." Pemberton traced his finger over a large map spread across his desk. "Yes, I have it here. 40 acres, about 3 miles east of town. Has a small house on it, I believe, though I haven't been out there since old Harold passed last winter." "Is the house habitable?" Hannah asked, the question crucial to her plans. "Was when Harold was alive. Simple place, but he kept it up. There's a well on the property, decent soil for a small garden." Pemberton looked up at her over his spectacles. "You planning to work it yourself, Mrs. Downing?" "Miss," Hannah corrected automatically. "And yes, I intend to." Pemberton's expression betrayed his doubt, though he politely said nothing. Instead, he provided directions to the property and made notes in his ledger confirming her ownership. "Thank you," Hannah said, folding the papers carefully. "Is there someone who might be able to take me out there today?" "Ben at the livery might rent you a horse if you can ride. Otherwise—" Pemberton hesitated. "It's market day. Most folks with wagons are already headed to their business." Hannah's heart sank. She could ride, but barely, and the thought of traveling alone in unfamiliar territory was daunting. "I could take you." The deep voice from the doorway made both Hannah and Pemberton turn. Zachary Quinn stood there, hat in hand, those same striking blue eyes now clearly visible in the morning light. He was taller than Hannah had first thought, broad-shouldered but lean, with a face that spoke of both hardship and integrity. "Mr. Quinn," Pemberton greeted him with obvious respect. "Didn't see you there." "Just coming to check on that deed matter we discussed last week," Quinn said, but his eyes stayed on Hannah. "Couldn't help overhearing. I'm headed east myself this morning. Would be no trouble to show the lady to Harold Downing's old place." Hannah stiffened. "I wouldn't want to impose." "No imposition," Quinn said simply. "I need to check fence lines out that way anyhow." Pemberton nodded encouragingly at Hannah. "You couldn't ask for a better guide, Miss Downing. Mr. Quinn knows every inch of this county." Hannah hesitated, weighing her options. Pride urged her to refuse, to find her own way as she had done since Chicago, but practicality won out. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn. I would appreciate that." Quinn nodded once. "I've got my wagon outside, ready when you are." 20 minutes later, Hannah sat beside Zachary Quinn on the wooden seat of a well-maintained wagon, her carpetbag at her feet, as they headed east out of Trinity. The morning was still cool, the sun not yet high enough to bring the day's full heat. Quinn handled the team of horses with easy skill, his movements economical and assured. They rode in silence for the first mile, the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady clip of hooves the only sounds. Hannah kept her gaze on the landscape, rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and the occasional stand of trees, so different from the crowded streets she'd known. "First time in Texas?" Quinn finally asked, breaking the silence. "Yes," Hannah replied, not elaborating. "It takes some getting used to," he said. The space, the sky, some find it overwhelming. Hannah glanced up at the vast blue expanse above them. It's different, Quinn nodded, seemingly content with her sparse response. They traveled another quarter-mile before he spoke again. Your uncle was a good man, kept to himself mostly, but always willing to lend a hand when needed. This caught Hannah's attention. You knew him, enough to call him neighbor. My ranch borders your property to the north. He helped me dig out a new well last summer when mine went dry. Hannah absorbed this information, trying to form a picture of the uncle she'd never met. Her father had rarely spoken of his older brother, and the deed had come to her through a lawyer's letter months after Harold Downing's passing. Did he have friends? People in town who knew him well? She asked. Quinn seemed to consider this. He wasn't one for social gatherings, but he was respected. Came to town every Sunday for church, did his trading at Peterson's store. Mrs. Holloway at the hotel mentioned he used to be sweet on her sister, years back, before she married and moved to Abilene. This small glimpse into her uncle's life felt strangely precious to Hannah. A connection, however tenuous, to family beyond the ruins of her past. There it is, Quinn said, pointing ahead where a small house stood in a clearing. Harold Downing's place. Your place now. The house was simple but solidly built, a one-story structure with a small porch across the front. A barn stood nearby, along with what appeared to be a chicken coop. A well with a hand pump was visible to one side, and beyond that, Hannah could make out fenced areas that might once have been garden plots. Quinn brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house. For a long moment, Hannah simply stared, trying to reconcile this remote dwelling with her new reality. This would be her home now, this isolated house in this vast, unfamiliar land. Would you like me to check inside first? Quinn offered, his voice gentle, as if sensing her trepidation. Hannah shook her head, steeling herself. No, thank you, I can manage. She climbed down from the wagon without waiting for his assistance, though she noted he'd already moved to offer it. With steady steps, she approached the porch. The door was secured with a simple latch, no lock. Inside, she found a single large room with a stone fireplace at one end. A curtained alcove presumably held a bed, while rough-hewn furniture, a table, 2 chairs, and a rocking chair occupied the main space. A few books sat on a shelf, alongside cooking utensils and dishware. The air was stale but not unpleasant. Someone, perhaps a neighbor, perhaps Quinn himself, had closed up the house properly after her uncle's passing. There was no sign of rodents or other unwelcome inhabitants. Hannah moved through the space slowly, touching the back of the rocking chair, running her fingers along the edge of the table. This was her uncle's life, distilled into objects and space. Now it would be hers. Quinn appeared in the doorway, respectfully not entering without invitation. Pump works, he reported. Checked it while you were looking around. Water's good. There's firewood stacked behind the house, should last a few weeks. Hannah nodded, acknowledging his thoughtfulness. Thank you. Roof looks sound, he continued. Windows are all intact. Harold kept things in good repair. Hannah moved to the fireplace, noting the neatly stacked kindling and the iron cookware hanging nearby. Was he ill long before he passed? Quinn shook his head. Heart gave out, from what Doc Watson said. Found him in his field one morning. Peaceful way to go if you have to. Hannah nodded, inexplicably relieved to know her uncle hadn't suffered. She'd seen enough suffering to last several lifetimes. I should get back to town, she said suddenly, the reality of her situation becoming clear. I'll need supplies. Quinn studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. There's basics here: flour, coffee, some preserved goods in the root cellar. I checked when I heard you were coming, but you'll need more if you're planning to stay. I am staying, Hannah said firmly, more to herself than to Quinn. He nodded once, accepting her decision without question. I can take you back to town now, help you get what you need and bring you back out before dark. Or if you prefer, I can come back for you tomorrow. Hannah considered her options. The thought of staying alone in this remote house on her first night was daunting, but equally challenging was the idea of relying so heavily on this stranger's kindness. I wouldn't want to take up your entire day, she said carefully. It's no hardship, Quinn replied simply. As I said, I have business in that direction anyway. Something in his steady gaze told Hannah that he was not being entirely truthful, that he had, in fact, altered his plans to accommodate her needs. The realization brought a complexity of emotions she wasn't prepared to examine. Tomorrow would be better, she decided. I'd like some time to become acquainted with the property. Quinn nodded. I'll come by around 9 if that suits. That would be fine. Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Zach, he said, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. Most folks around here just call me Zach. Hannah hesitated, then nodded. Thank you, Zach. After Quinn departed, Hannah spent the remainder of the day exploring her new home. The barn contained basic tools, a plow that had seen better days, and stalls that had once housed animals but now stood empty. The chicken coop was similarly abandoned, though structurally sound. Behind the house, she discovered the remnants of what had once been a thriving garden, now overgrown but potentially salvageable. As the sun began to set, Hannah returned to the house. She worked the pump until fresh water flowed, filled the kettle, and built a small fire in the fireplace. From the root cellar, she retrieved a jar of preserved peaches and found coffee beans in a tin on a shelf. The simple act of preparing a meal in this quiet space brought an unexpected sense of calm. Later, as darkness fell completely, Hannah sat in the rocking chair by the fire, a cup of strong coffee warming her hands. The silence was profound, no street noise, no neighbors' voices, none of the constant sounds that had been the backdrop to her life in Chicago. Only the occasional pop from the fire and, distantly, the call of some night creature. Alone in this silence, Hannah allowed herself to remember the bakery she and William had built together in Chicago, the apartment above it where they'd made their home. The joy when she discovered she was with child, followed by the devastating stillbirth 6 months later. And then the fire that had claimed both the bakery and William while she'd been visiting her dying mother in her childhood home 50 miles away. Hannah rocked slowly, letting the tears come as they hadn't in months. Here, with no one to witness, she could finally mourn all she had lost. The dreams, the future, the love that had sustained her. By the time the fire burned low, her tears had dried, leaving behind a hollowness that was both painful and somehow cleansing. She moved to the alcove, pulling back the curtain to reveal a narrow bed with a surprisingly clean quilt. After washing with water from the basin, Hannah changed into her nightgown and slipped between the sheets. The bed smelled faintly of lavender and cedar. Someone had stored the bedding properly during the months the house had stood empty. Sleep came more easily than she had expected, the exhaustion of travel and emotion finally overtaking her. For the first night in many months, Hannah did not dream of flames or loss. Instead, her sleep was deep and undisturbed until the first light of dawn filtered through the window. The morning brought a new determination. Hannah rose early, washed and dressed in her sturdiest skirt and blouse. After a simple breakfast of more preserved fruit and coffee, she ventured outside to further assess her new property. The land stretched in all directions, much of it uncultivated but with potential. A small stream ran along the eastern edge, providing water for the scattered trees that offered welcome shade. As she walked the boundaries, Hannah began to form plans. She would need seeds for a garden, chickens for eggs, perhaps a milk cow eventually. The soil seemed rich enough to support vegetables, and she'd noticed wild berry bushes not far from the house. With careful management, she might be able to become self-sufficient within a year. She was marking out a potential garden plot when she heard the approaching wagon. Glancing at the position of the sun, Hannah realized it was already close to 9. Quinn was punctual. He drove up to the house, handling the horses with the same easy confidence she'd noted yesterday. Today he wore a clean shirt under his leather vest, and his hat looked as though it had been brushed. "Morning, Miss Downing," he called as he brought the wagon to a stop. "Hope you passed a comfortable night." "I did, thank you," Hannah replied, surprised to find the statement true. Quinn jumped down from the wagon with a fluid grace that spoke of years of physical work. "Ready to head into town?" "Yes, let me just get my things." The ride into Trinity was less silent than their journey the previous day. Quinn pointed out landmarks and boundaries, naming the few neighboring properties. Hannah listened, filing away the information, asking occasional questions about the climate and growing seasons. "You're planning to farm, then?" Quinn asked as they approached town. "On a small scale," Hannah confirmed. "Enough to sustain myself, at least initially. I have some experience with gardens, though nothing so extensive." Quinn nodded thoughtfully. "Soil's good on your land. Harold always had a fine garden, traded vegetables in town sometimes." This information heartened Hannah. If her uncle had succeeded, perhaps she could as well. Trinity looked different in the full light of day, somehow both smaller and more vibrant than it had appeared upon her arrival. People moved about on various errands, and several nodded in greeting to Quinn as he guided the wagon to a hitching post in front of Peterson's general store. "Mr. Peterson carries most of what you'll need," Quinn said as he helped Hannah down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "Fair prices, as I mentioned. For seeds, you might want to speak with Mrs. Abernathy down at the far end of the street. She has the best selection this side of Austin." Hannah nodded, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar contact. It had been so long since anyone had touched her, even in such a practical way. "Thank you. I'll manage from here." Quinn studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "I have some business at the bank. Shall we meet back here in 2 hours?" "That should be sufficient," Hannah agreed, already making mental calculations about what supplies she could afford with her limited funds. Inside Peterson's store, Hannah was greeted by a portly man with kind eyes and a gray mustache. "You must be Harold Downing's niece," he said, extending his hand. "Word travels fast in Trinity. I'm Joseph Peterson." "Hannah Downing," she replied, accepting the handshake. "Yes, I've come to take possession of my uncle's property." "Fine man, your uncle. Sorry for your loss." Peterson's sincerity was evident. "What can I help you with today?" Hannah produced a carefully prepared list. "I'll need these basics to start. And perhaps you could advise me on what else might be necessary for someone living alone on a small property." Peterson read through her list with professional attention. "All sensible choices. I'd add lamp oil nights get dark out your way with no neighbors close by. And perhaps a few more preserves to tide you over until your garden comes in. Oh, and matches. Can't have too many matches." Hannah appreciated his practical advice, and together they assembled a collection of supplies that would see her through at least the next 2 weeks. The total came to more than she had hoped, but less than she had feared. "I can deliver these out to your place tomorrow if you'd like," Peterson offered. "Save you trying to fit it all in Quinn's wagon today." "That would be helpful, thank you," Hannah said, relieved at not having to impose further on Quinn. After settling her account with Peterson, Hannah made her way to Mrs. Abernathy's small shop at the end of the street. The proprietress proved to be a tiny woman with sharp eyes and a wealth of knowledge about what would grow best in the local soil. Hannah left with packets of seeds for beans, corn, tomatoes, and various hardy vegetables, along with detailed instructions for planting and care. Her final stop was at a small feed store where she arranged to purchase 6 laying hens and a rooster to be delivered along with her supplies the following day. The owner, a taciturn man named Simmons, asked fewer questions than Peterson or Mrs. Abernathy had, which Hannah found refreshing. With time to spare before meeting Quinn, Hannah paused at a small cafe for a cup of tea. She sat by the window, watching the activity on Trinity's main street. People came and went about their business, a woman with 2 small children in tow, an elderly man walking with the aid of a cane, a group of cowboys laughing outside the saloon. Normal life in this small frontier town. It struck Hannah then how long it had been since she had simply observed life happening around her. In Chicago, after the losses, she had moved through the world with blinders on, seeing only what was necessary to survive each day. Here, in this unfamiliar place, she found herself noticing details again: the pattern on a woman's dress, the way sunlight caught on the metal star on the sheriff's chest as he made his rounds, the sound of children's laughter. The realization didn't bring joy exactly, but a kind of quiet acknowledgement. She was still alive, still part of the world, even if her heart felt encased in ice. As promised, Quinn was waiting by his wagon when Hannah returned to Peterson's store. He took her parcels, adding them to the supplies he had apparently purchased as well. "Got everything you need?" he asked, helping her up onto the wagon seat. "For now," Hannah replied. "Mr. Peterson has kindly offered to deliver the rest tomorrow, along with some chickens from Mr. Simmons." Quinn nodded approvingly. Chickens are a good start, easy to care for, reliable for eggs. As they left town, Hannah noticed Quinn had added a rifle to the wagon, propped within easy reach on his side. He caught her glance. "Just a precaution," he explained. "Haven't had trouble with bandits in these parts for a while, but better to be prepared." Hannah nodded, appreciating his foresight even as it reminded her of the potential dangers of her new life. The vast emptiness that had seemed merely strange yesterday now took on a more threatening aspect. Alone in her uncle's house, she would be isolated, vulnerable. As if reading her thoughts, Quinn spoke again. "Your nearest neighbors besides me are the Hendersons, about 2 miles to the south. Good people. Tom Henderson's wife Martha would be happy for the company, I expect. They have 3 young children." Hannah absorbed this information, noting the implied suggestion that she should make connections, build relationships in this new place. Part of her resisted the idea she had come to Trinity to escape, to be alone with her grief. But the practical side of her understood the necessity of community in this remote landscape. "I'll pay them a visit when I'm more settled," she said non-committally. Quinn glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Trinity folks are good about looking out for each other. It's how we all survive out here." Hannah felt a flash of defensiveness. "I'm not unfamiliar with hard work, Mr. Quinn. I managed a business in Chicago for several years." "Zach," he corrected gently, "and I wasn't suggesting otherwise. Just that there's a difference between city living and what you're taking on here. Even your uncle, who'd lived out here 20 years, knew when to ask for help." Hannah fell silent, acknowledging the truth in his words even as she struggled with the idea of dependence on others. The past year had taught her the danger of relying on anyone or anything outside herself. They reached her property by mid-afternoon. Quinn insisted on carrying her purchases inside, and even stayed to help her organize them: flour, sugar, and coffee in tight-lidded containers to keep out pests. lamp oil safely away from the fireplace, preserved goods lined neatly on a shelf. When everything was put away, Hannah felt an awkward silence descend. Social convention dictated she should offer refreshment to someone who had been so helpful, but the prospect of extending this interaction made her uneasy. Before she could decide, Quinn spoke. "I should be getting back. Got chores waiting at my place." "Of course," Hannah said, relief mixing with an unexpected twinge of regret. "Thank you for your assistance today and yesterday. I appreciate it." Quinn nodded, settling his hat back on his head. "Peterson should be by with your other supplies sometime tomorrow morning, if you need anything before then." He hesitated. "Well, as I said, my place is just north. Follow the stream about a mile, you'll see the fence line. Can't miss the house from there." "I'm sure I'll be fine," Hannah said, her tone more confident than she felt. Quinn studied her for a moment, those blue eyes seeming to see more than Hannah was comfortable revealing. Then he nodded once. "Good day, Miss Downing." "Good day, Mr. Quinn," she replied formally, following him to the door. From the porch, Hannah watched as he climbed into his wagon and set off, raising a hand in farewell as he reached the edge of the property. She returned the gesture automatically, then stood for several minutes after he had disappeared from view, feeling the vast silence settle around her once again. That evening, as Hannah prepared a simple supper of beans and biscuits, she found her thoughts returning to Zachary Quinn. There was something compelling about his quiet strength, his straightforward manner. In Chicago, she had known men of education and culture, men who spoke eloquently and dressed fashionably. Quinn was nothing like them, and yet there was a depth to him that Hannah found herself reluctantly respecting. She pushed the thoughts away, focusing instead on her plans for the coming days. The garden would be her first priority, followed by preparing the chicken coop for its new inhabitants. She would need to explore the property more thoroughly, perhaps find where her uncle had cut his firewood. There was much to do, and Hannah welcomed the prospect of physical labor, of exhaustion that might bring dreamless sleep. True to Peterson's word, a wagon arrived the next morning with her remaining supplies and the chickens. The delivery boy, a freckle-faced youth of about 16, helped her carry everything inside and even assisted in setting up the chicken coop with feed and water. "Mr. Peterson says to tell you he included some extra preserves on the house," the boy said as he prepared to leave. "Said it was something he and your uncle had arranged before he passed." Hannah was surprised and oddly touched by this gesture from the shopkeeper. "Please thank him for me." "Yes, madam. And Mr. Quinn stopped by the store this morning, said to make sure you got this." The boy handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Hannah accepted it with confusion. "Did he say what it was?" "No, madam, just that it might be useful." With that, the boy tipped his hat and departed, leaving Hannah standing on her porch with the mysterious package. Inside, she unwrapped it to find a small revolver and a box of ammunition. A note in a strong, clear hand read simply, "For protection. Hope you never need it. ZQ." Hannah stared at the weapon, a mixture of emotions washing over her. The gesture was both thoughtful and presumptuous. Did Quinn think her so helpless that she couldn't provide for her own safety? And yet, the practical part of her acknowledged that the revolver might indeed prove necessary in this remote place. With cautious hands, she examined the gun. It was smaller than she had expected, clearly chosen for a woman's grip. Despite her initial reaction, Hannah had to admit it was a considerate choice. She had never fired a gun, but living alone as she now did, perhaps it was a skill she should acquire. Setting the revolver aside for now, Hannah turned her attention to organizing her new supplies and settling the chickens into their coop. The day passed quickly in practical tasks, and she found a certain satisfaction in the tangible results of her labor. By evening, her small house felt more ordered, more like a place where she might eventually belong. The next several days fell into a pattern. Hannah rose at dawn, tended to the chickens, and worked on clearing the overgrown garden plot. She took her meals simply, usually on the porch where she could watch the changing light over the landscape. In the evenings, she sometimes read from the small collection of books her uncle had left, mostly practical guides to farming and animal husbandry, but also a volume of poetry that showed signs of frequent reading. On her 5th day at the property, Hannah was startled by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, she saw a rider approaching, not in a wagon this time, but on horseback. Even at a distance, she recognized Zachary Quinn's broad shoulders and straight posture. Hannah set aside the garden tool she had been using and wiped her hands on her apron. She was suddenly conscious of her appearance, hair escaping its pins, dirt smudging her cheeks, dress damp with perspiration from her work. Quinn dismounted with easy grace when he reached the yard, leading his horse to the water trough by the barn. "Afternoon, Miss Downing," he called, keeping a respectful distance. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Hannah replied, though she wasn't entirely sure this was true. "I was just working on the garden." Quinn nodded approvingly as he glanced at the neat rows she had begun to establish. "Coming along well. Thank you." Hannah hesitated, then added, "And thank you for the gift, though I'm not sure I know how to use it properly." Quinn's expression remained serious. "Hoped you might say that. I could show you if you'd like." Hannah considered the offer. Learning to handle the revolver safely was undoubtedly practical, and Quinn seemed the logical instructor. "I would appreciate that." "Now's as good a time as any," Quinn suggested. "Got some cans in my saddlebag we can use for targets." After retrieving the revolver from the house, Hannah followed Quinn to a clearing a short distance away. He set up several cans on a fallen log, then turned to her with a serious expression. "First thing to understand is that this isn't a toy. It's a tool like an axe or a saw, but more dangerous if mishandled." For the next hour, Quinn patiently taught Hannah how to load, aim, and fire the small revolver. His instructions were clear and respectful, with none of the condescension she might have expected. Under his guidance, Hannah managed to hit 3 of the 5 cans by the end of their impromptu lesson. "Good eye," Quinn commented as she successfully hit the last target. "Steady hand, too." "Thank you," Hannah said, surprised to find herself feeling a small sense of accomplishment. "Though I hope I never have cause to use this skill against anything but cans." "That's my hope too," Quinn agreed, his expression solemn. "But out here it's better to be prepared." As they walked back to the house, Quinn carrying the remaining cans, Hannah found herself curious about this man who had so readily offered his assistance. "You mentioned you lost your brother in the war," she said, recalling the stagecoach driver's comments on her first day. "Were you also a soldier?" Quinn nodded, his expression growing distant. "Confederate cavalry. Robert, my brother, and I both enlisted when Texas seceded. He didn't make it past Shiloh." Hannah absorbed this information, thinking of the terrible divisions the war had created, divisions that in some ways still hadn't healed 13 years later. "I'm sorry for your loss." Quinn glanced at her, seeming to measure her sincerity. "Thank you. It was a long time ago now." "And yet we carry such things with us always," Hannah said softly, speaking from her own experience of grief. Quinn's pace slowed, and he studied her with those penetrating blue eyes. "Yes, we do." They had reached the house, and Hannah felt suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. "Would you like some coffee? It's the least I can offer after your instruction." Quinn hesitated, then nodded. "That would be welcome, thank you." Inside, Hannah busied herself with the coffee pot, grateful for the simple task that allowed her to regain her composure. Quinn stood awkwardly by the door, hat in hand, until she gestured toward the table. "Please sit." As the coffee brewed, an uncomfortable silence descended. Hannah searched for a neutral topic of conversation. "Have you lived in Trinity long?" "All my life," Quinn replied. "My father established our ranch just after Texas joined the Union, built it up from nothing." "It must be a large operation," Hannah commented, setting 2 cups on the table. "Decent size. Not as big as some, but enough to keep me busy." Quinn accepted the cup she offered with a nod of thanks. 500 head of cattle, a dozen horses. Hired hands help with the bigger jobs, but mostly I manage on my own these days. Hannah was impressed despite herself. Managing such a property single-handedly spoke to Quinn's capability and determination. "And you?" Quinn asked after taking a sip of coffee. "You mentioned Chicago. What brought you all the way to Texas?" The question, though predictable, caught Hannah off guard. She had been so careful to avoid personal conversations, to keep her past safely locked away. Yet something about Quinn's direct gaze made evasion seem childish. "Necessity," she answered finally. "I had nothing left in Chicago after a fire destroyed my husband's bakery, with him in it." The words came out more abruptly than she had intended, harsh in their simplicity. Quinn's expression didn't change, but his eyes softened with understanding. "I'm sorry." Hannah nodded, accepting his sympathy without meeting his gaze. "When I received word about my uncle's property, it seemed like a sign. A fresh start, perhaps." "It can be that," Quinn said quietly. "If you let it." Hannah looked up then, struck by the perception in his words. "Perhaps." They finished their coffee in a silence that felt less awkward than before. When Quinn rose to leave, Hannah walked with him to where his horse waited. "Thank you for the shooting lesson," she said formally. "It was helpful." "My pleasure." Quinn settled his hat on his head. "I'll be by in a few days to see how you're getting on, if that's all right." Hannah was surprised to find she didn't mind the prospect. That would be fine. As Quinn rode away, Hannah found herself standing in the yard long after he had disappeared from sight. There was something unsettling about Zachary Quinn, something that made her more aware of herself as a woman, not merely a survivor. It was a feeling she had thought buried with William, and its reemergence was both alarming and strangely vitalizing. Shaking off such thoughts, Hannah returned to her garden work, losing herself in the simple rhythm of turning soil and pulling weeds. Yet throughout the evening, as she prepared her solitary meal and sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant oranges and purples, her mind kept returning to the quiet strength in Quinn's blue eyes and the careful way he had taught her to protect herself. True to his word, Quinn returned 3 days later, this time bringing a young apple sapling in the back of his wagon. "Thought your place could use some fruit trees," he explained as he helped Hannah dig a hole for planting. "Takes a few years to bear, but worth the wait." Hannah was touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "That's very kind. Thank you." "Neighborly thing to do," Quinn said simply, but his eyes lingered on her face a moment longer than strictly necessary. The pattern continued over the following weeks. Quinn would appear every few days, always with some practical reason, bringing extra fence posts when he noticed hers were weathered, helping to repair a leak in the barn roof before the rainy season, showing her how to predict weather changes by watching the behavior of animals and cloud formations. Hannah found herself gradually accepting his presence, even looking forward to his visits. Quinn never stayed long, never presumed upon her hospitality beyond the occasional cup of coffee, but each time he came, the silence of her solitary existence seemed less oppressive afterward. Spring advanced into early summer. Hannah's garden flourished under her care, providing fresh vegetables to supplement her meals. The chickens produced eggs in abundance, and she had begun to trade the excess with Peterson for items she couldn't produce herself. Gradually, Harold Downing's property was becoming Hannah's home. One afternoon in late June, Quinn arrived with a different purpose. "Town's having its Independence Day celebration this Saturday," he said as he helped Hannah harvest the first of her tomatoes. "Thought you might like to attend. Meet more of your neighbors." Hannah hesitated. She had ventured into Trinity only twice since settling on her property, quick trips for necessities rather than social calls. The prospect of a public gathering of questions and curious eyes made her uneasy. "I'm not much for celebrations," she said carefully. Quinn straightened, wiping his brow with his sleeve. The summer heat had intensified over the past week, and even in the shade of the garden's edge, perspiration dampened his shirt. "Understand that," he said, his tone neutral. "Just thought it might be good for you to connect with more folks than just me and Peterson." Hannah felt a twinge of guilt at his words. Quinn had been unfailingly kind since her arrival, expecting nothing in return for his assistance. Perhaps she owed him this small concession. "What sort of celebration is it?" she asked, relenting slightly. Quinn's expression brightened subtly. "Nothing fancy. Potluck dinner on the town square, some music, maybe dancing later. Children run races in the afternoon. Simple pleasures, but folks look forward to it all year." Hannah considered the proposal. A few hours of discomfort in exchange for Quinn's continued goodwill seemed a fair trade, and perhaps a small voice whispered it might be healing to participate in normal life again, however briefly. "Very well," she agreed. "I'll come for a short while." Quinn's smile transformed his weather-worn face, making him appear years younger. "I'll come by around noon to fetch you if that's agreeable." "That would be fine," Hannah replied, suddenly flustered by the pleasure her acquiescence had clearly brought him. Saturday arrived with clear skies and a slight breeze that tempered the summer heat. Hannah spent the morning preparing a large bowl of fresh garden salad to contribute to the potluck, then faced the challenge of her appearance. It had been so long since she had dressed for a social occasion that she felt almost like a different person. As she put on her best dress, a simple blue cotton with white trim that had once been reserved for Sunday services in Chicago. Her hair, which she normally wore in a practical bun, she allowed to be arranged in a looser style, pinned at the sides but falling in waves down her back. The woman who looked back at her from the small mirror above the washstand was a stranger still marked by grief, but somehow more present, more alive than the hollow-eyed figure who had arrived in Trinity months earlier. Quinn arrived precisely at noon, driving a freshly polished wagon pulled by his best team. Hannah was startled to see him in a clean white shirt, dark vest, and what appeared to be newly pressed trousers. His hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. The transformation was striking. "Miss Downing," he greeted her, a hint of appreciation in his eyes as they took in her appearance. "You look lovely." "Thank you," Hannah replied, flustered by the compliment. "You look quite presentable yourself." A smile tugged at the corner of Quinn's mouth. "High praise indeed." The drive to Trinity passed pleasantly, the landscape vibrant with summer growth. Quinn pointed out landmarks Hannah hadn't noticed before: a hidden spring, a grove of trees that produced excellent nuts in the fall, the distant outline of his own ranch house visible from a certain bend in the road. Trinity itself was transformed for the celebration. Bunting in red, white, and blue draped the buildings around the town square. Tables had been set up in the shade of large oak trees, already beginning to fill with dishes brought by townsfolk. A small platform at one end of the square held several men with instruments of fiddle, guitar, and harmonica tuning up for later performances. As Quinn helped Hannah down from the wagon, she felt a flutter of anxiety. So many people, so many potential questions about her past, her plans. "You'll be fine," Quinn said quietly, seeming to sense her trepidation. "Trinity folks are curious but not intrusive, and I'll stay close by." The simple promise of his presence was unexpectedly reassuring. Hannah nodded, straightening her shoulders as she carried her salad bowl toward the food tables. The afternoon unfolded more pleasantly than Hannah had anticipated. Quinn introduced her to various townspeople, most of whom welcomed her warmly without pressing for details about her life before Trinity. She met the Hendersons, her southern neighbors whom Quinn had mentioned. Martha Henderson immediately invited Hannah to Sunday dinner the following week. The sheriff's wife, Mrs. Mallory, complimented Hannah's salad and asked for her secret to growing such lovely tomatoes. Throughout it all, Quinn remained nearby, not hovering but present, occasionally catching her eye across the gathering with a reassuring nod or small smile. Hannah found herself relaxing gradually, even enjoying some of the conversations. After the communal meal, the musicians began to play in earnest. Children cleared a space for dancing, and couples began to take their places for a lively reel. Hannah sat with Martha Henderson, watching the dancers with a detached interest that felt like progress from the numbness that had enveloped her for so long. "Your Mr. Quinn is quite the dancer," Martha commented, nodding toward where Quinn was partnering Mrs. Peterson in a spirited turn around the square. "He's not my Mr. Quinn," Hannah corrected automatically, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. Martha's knowing smile suggested she had her own opinion on the matter. "He's a good man, best neighbor anyone could ask for." After Tom injured his back last winter, Zach came every day for a week to help with our chores, wouldn't take a penny for it. Hannah wasn't surprised by this account of Quinn's character. It aligned perfectly with what she had observed herself. "Yes, he's been very helpful since my arrival," she acknowledged. "Not just helpful to you," Martha continued, her voice softening. "Zach Quinn has been the backbone of this community since the hard years after the war. When drought nearly ruined half the farms around here in '71, he opened his water rights to anyone who needed them. When the bank was threatening foreclosures during the panic last year, he personally guaranteed loans for 3 families. Hannah absorbed this information, adding it to her growing understanding of the man who had so unexpectedly become a central figure in her new life. There was a depth to Quinn, an integrity that went beyond simple kindness. The dance ended and Quinn appeared before them, slightly flushed from exertion but smiling. "Ladies," he greeted them, tipping his hat. "Enjoying the music?" "Very much," Martha replied, "though I think Hannah might enjoy it more if she weren't just watching." Before Hannah could protest, Martha had made an excuse about checking on her children and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Hannah alone with Quinn. "Would you care to dance, Miss Downing?" Quinn asked, extending his hand. Hannah hesitated. Dancing felt like a step she wasn't ready to take, a return to normalcy that might be premature. And yet, the music was inviting, the atmosphere joyful in a way that seemed to pull at something long dormant within her. "I'm rather out of practice," she hedged. "Fortunately, it's like riding a horse," Quinn said with a gentle smile. "The body remembers even when the mind has doubts." Perhaps it was the simple wisdom in his words, or perhaps it was the warmth in his eyes, but Hannah found herself placing her hand in his. "Very well. One dance." Quinn led her to the edge of the dancing area, just as the musicians struck up a waltz. His hand at her waist was respectful, his grip on her fingers firm but gentle as he guided her into the steps of the dance. Hannah was indeed rusty, but Quinn led with such confidence that she soon found the rhythm. They moved together among the other couples, not speaking but communicating through the subtle pressure of his hand, the direction of his steps. Hannah became aware of the strength in his frame, the clean scent of soap and sun-dried cotton that clung to him, the careful way he adjusted his stride to accommodate her smaller steps. As they turned near the edge of the square, Hannah caught sight of their reflection in the window of the general store, a tall, broad-shouldered man and a slender woman in blue, moving in perfect harmony. For just a moment, she allowed herself to see them as others might, not a grieving widow and a helpful neighbor, but a handsome couple enjoying a summer dance. The thought brought both pain and a strange, unexpected comfort. William would always be the great love of her young life, the partner with whom she had planned a future. But here, in this new place, she was creating a different life entirely. Perhaps there was room in that life for new connections, new possibilities. The waltz ended too soon, and Quinn escorted Hannah back to the seating area. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. "Been a while since I had such a graceful partner." Hannah felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "You're too kind. I stepped on your foot at least twice. Did you?" Quinn's expression was all innocence. "Didn't notice." The rest of the celebration passed in a pleasant blur. Hannah found herself drawn into conversations, sharing recipes with the town's women, accepting compliments on her garden's production from the men. By the time twilight fell and lanterns were lit around the square, she realized she had spent hours without the weight of grief pressing quite so heavily on her shoulders. As they drove back to her property under a sky brilliant with stars, Hannah sat quietly beside Quinn, absorbing the events of the day. Something had shifted, both in how she viewed Trinity and perhaps in how she viewed herself. "Thank you," she said finally as they approached her house, the windows dark in the night, "for persuading me to attend. It was more enjoyable than I expected." Quinn glanced at her, his profile strong in the moonlight. "People welcomed you. You belong here now, whether you realize it or not." The simple statement touched Hannah deeply. Belonging was something she hadn't expected to feel again after Chicago, after William. The possibility that she might create a place for herself here, among these people, was both frightening and exhilarating. Quinn helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering briefly at her waist. "I'll see you safely inside," he said, his voice low in the darkness. Hannah didn't protest as he accompanied her to the door, waited as she lit the lamp inside and checked that all was as it should be. His concern was touching rather than intrusive, his presence reassuring rather than threatening. "Good night, Miss Downing," Quinn said formally as he prepared to leave. "I enjoyed your company today." "Hannah," she said suddenly, surprising herself. "Please, after all this time, I think you might call me Hannah." Quinn's smile in the lamplight was worth the momentary vulnerability. "Hannah," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "Good night then, Hannah. Sleep well." As she watched him drive away, Hannah felt a curious lightness in her chest. Not happiness exactly, that seemed too strong a word for the tentative reawakening she was experiencing. But perhaps it was the beginning of healing, the first tender shoot of possibility emerging from the ashes of her past. The weeks that followed brought subtle changes to Hannah's life. She found herself accepting Martha Henderson's dinner invitation, then reciprocating with one of her own. She began to attend Sunday services in Trinity, exchanging pleasantries with townspeople who increasingly treated her as one of their own rather than an outsider. And always, there was Zach Quinn, a steady presence that Hannah realized she had come to depend upon. His visits continued, still practical in nature but now flavored with a growing camaraderie. They worked side by side in her garden, repaired fencing, and once spent an afternoon fishing in the stream that marked her eastern boundary. In the evenings, they would sometimes sit on her porch, watching the sunset while discussing books they had read or sharing stories of their lives before they had met. Quinn, Hannah discovered, had a quiet intelligence that belied his rough exterior. He had been educated in Austin before the war interrupted his studies, and he maintained a surprisingly extensive library at his ranch. His knowledge of Texas history and natural sciences was particularly impressive, and Hannah found herself eagerly absorbing the information he shared about the land and its patterns. In return, Hannah gradually revealed more of her own past her childhood in a small Illinois town, her marriage to William at 19, their dream of building a bakery business together. She spoke of William's talent with pastry, his infectious laugh, the way he could charm even the most difficult customers. She didn't speak of the fire, of her losses after, but Quinn seemed to understand the boundaries of her sharing, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. Summer turned to fall, bringing cooler temperatures and changing colors to the landscape. Hannah's garden yielded its final harvests, which she carefully preserved for winter use. Her chicken flock had grown, and she had even acquired a milk cow, a gift from Quinn that she had initially resisted but ultimately accepted as a practical necessity. One crisp October afternoon, Quinn arrived with an unexpected invitation. "Got a proposition for you," he said as they sat on her porch, drinking the apple cider she had made from fruit purchased from a traveling vendor. "My foreman's wife is expecting their third child, and they're moving into Trinity to be closer to the doctor. Leaves me without a cook for the ranch hands." Hannah raised an eyebrow, uncertain where this was leading. "Wondered if you might be interested in the position," Quinn continued. "3 meals a day for 6 men, including me. Pay is good, and you'd still have time for your own place." Hannah considered the offer. The practical benefits were obvious. Regular income would provide security through the winter months when her garden couldn't produce. But it would also mean daily proximity to Quinn, a prospect that both appealed to and alarmed her. "I'd need to know more details," she said cautiously. "Hours, expectations, compensation." Quinn smiled, clearly having anticipated her businesslike approach. "Breakfast at sunrise, dinner at noon, supper at sunset, Sundays off unless it's roundup or branding time. $20 a month plus all the supplies you need." It was a generous offer, Hannah knew, and yet, "I'm not sure I'm ready to be around so many people on a daily basis," she admitted. "It's taken me this long just to become comfortable in town occasionally." Quinn nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Understand that. My men are respectful and your cooking space would be your own domain, but I won't press if it doesn't feel right to you." His willingness to accept her hesitation without argument was yet another example of the consideration that had marked all their interactions. Hannah found herself reconsidering. "Could I perhaps try it for a week?" she suggested. "To see if it's something I could manage." Quinn's face brightened. "That seems fair. Start Monday." And so Hannah found herself, the following week, rising before dawn to make the mile journey to Quinn's ranch. The main house was larger than she had expected, 2 stories with a wide porch and solid construction. Behind it stood the bunkhouse where the hands slept, and adjacent to the main house was the cookhouse, a spacious room with a large stove, ample work surfaces, and a dining area that could seat a dozen men comfortably. Quinn had stocked it with quality ingredients and good equipment, and Hannah found herself enjoying the challenge of preparing hearty meals for hungry workers. The ranch hands were indeed respectful, expressing appreciation for her cooking without making her feel uncomfortable with too much attention or conversation. And then there was Quinn himself. In this setting, his own domain, Hannah saw yet another facet of the man she had come to know. Here, he was clearly in command, efficient and decisive as he directed the day's work. The hands looked to him with obvious respect, and Hannah observed the fair but firm way he managed both people and resources. Yet with her, he maintained the same gentle consideration she had come to expect. He made sure she had everything she needed, checked that she was comfortable with the arrangements, but never hovered or interfered with her work. By the end of the trial week, Hannah had made her decision. "I'd like to accept the position," she told Quinn as she prepared to leave on Sunday evening. "If the offer still stands." The pleasure in his eyes was unmistakable. "It does. Glad to have you, Hannah." As autumn deepened toward winter, Hannah settled into a new rhythm. Mornings and evenings at Quinn's ranch, afternoons tending to her own property. The work was demanding but satisfying, and the income provided a security she hadn't experienced since before the fire. More than that, Hannah found herself gradually awakening to life again. The protective numbness that had enveloped her for so long was receding, allowing both pain and pleasure to filter through. She felt the ache of remembering William more acutely, but also the simple joy of a perfect sunrise, the satisfaction of creating food that nourished others, the comfort of growing connections with the people around her. And increasingly, there was Zach Quinn, whose steady presence had become the fixed point around which her new life seemed to revolve. Hannah wasn't ready to name the feelings that stirred when he smiled at her across the cookhouse, or when their hands accidentally touched as they worked side by side. But she could no longer deny that something was growing between them, something that both frightened and attracted her. The first significant snowfall came in early December, blanketing the landscape in pristine white. Hannah had stayed later than usual at the ranch, preparing extra food for the hands who would be checking on the cattle throughout the night. As she prepared to leave, Quinn appeared in the cookhouse doorway, concern evident in his expression. "Storm's getting worse," he said, glancing out the window where snow was falling heavily. "Not safe for you to head back to your place tonight." Hannah felt a flutter of anxiety. "I've traveled in snow before." "Not like this," Quinn insisted. "Winds picking up, temperature dropping fast. Foreman says it's the makings of a real Texas blue norther." As if to emphasize his point, a gust of wind rattled the windows, driving snow against the glass. "I can't impose," Hannah protested weakly. "Not an imposition," Quinn countered. "Got a spare room in the main house. Used to be my mother's sewing room. Small, but it's got a bed and it's warm." Hannah hesitated, torn between practicality and propriety. Staying overnight at Quinn's home, just the two of them, would certainly cause talk if it became known in Trinity. Reading her concern, Quinn added, "Mrs. Henderson is here too. Came to deliver some mending for the hands, got caught by the storm same as you. She's already settled in the guest room." The knowledge that Martha Henderson was also staying eased Hannah's concern somewhat. Still, the prospect of spending the night under Quinn's roof felt momentous, a crossing of some invisible boundary in their carefully maintained relationship. Another violent gust of wind made the decision for her. "Very well," she conceded. "Thank you for your hospitality." Quinn's relief was evident. "Let's get you settled then." The main house was warm and surprisingly comfortable. Quinn had maintained much of his parents' furniture, solid pieces built to last. And though the decor was undeniably masculine, there were touches handmade quilts, a few simple paintings that softened the overall effect. Martha Henderson greeted Hannah warmly in the main sitting room, where a fire blazed in a large stone fireplace. "Thank goodness Zach had the sense to keep you from trying to get home in this," she said, patting the sofa beside her. I've been telling him you work too hard, going back and forth every day regardless of weather. Hannah accepted a cup of hot tea from Quinn, who moved about his kitchen with the same efficiency he showed in all tasks. It's not usually so far, she demurred. Far enough when the weather turns, Martha insisted. I've been saying you should just move into town during the winter. The widow Collins has that spare room she's always trying to rent. The suggestion took Hannah by surprise. She had grown so accustomed to her solitary existence at her uncle's property that the idea of living in town, even temporarily, felt alien. I couldn't leave my animals, she said, the first objection that came to mind. Tom could check on them daily, Martha persisted. It's on his way to town anyway. Quinn, who had been quietly tending the fire, spoke up. Or you could stay here. Both women turned to look at him, Hannah with astonishment, Martha with something that looked suspiciously like satisfaction. In the foreman's cabin, Quinn clarified quickly. It's sitting empty now that Davis and his family have moved to town. It's small but sound, and it's only a quarter-mile from the main house. Close enough to the cookhouse that you wouldn't have to travel in bad weather. Hannah was speechless, the practical advantages of the arrangement warring with the implications of such a move. Living on Quinn's property, even in a separate cabin, would certainly be seen as significant by the people of Trinity. That seems a sensible solution, Martha said into the silence, her tone neutral but her eyes knowing as they moved between Hannah and Quinn. Especially with winter just beginning. Before Hannah could formulate a response, a particularly violent gust of wind howled around the house, rattling windows and sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. The storm outside was clearly intensifying. We should all get some rest, Quinn said, diplomatic as always. Hannah, I'll show you to your room. Martha knows where the guest room is. The small room Quinn led her to was indeed cozy, with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a simple dresser, and a small writing desk beneath the window. A lamp burned low on the bedside table, casting a warm glow over the space. Bathrooms down the hall, Quinn said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. There's extra blankets in the chest if you get cold. House can get drafty in a strong wind. Thank you, Hannah said, equally awkward. This is very kind of you. Quinn hesitated, seeming on the verge of saying something more. Then he simply nodded. Sleep well, Hannah. I'm just across the hall if you need anything. After he had gone, Hannah sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the storm rage outside. The situation felt surreal. Here she was, in Zachary Quinn's house, about to sleep under his roof. A year ago, she could never have imagined such a circumstance. A year ago, she had been a different person entirely. Lying in the narrow bed, wrapped in quilts that smelled faintly of cedar and lavender, Hannah found her thoughts drifting to the man whose steady presence had become such an integral part of her new life. Zach Quinn was unlike any man she had known before, different from her father with his merchant's mindset, different from William with his artistic temperament and urban sensibilities. Quinn was a product of this land, shaped by its harshness and its beauty alike, as solid and dependable as the hills that surrounded Trinity, and he cared for her. Hannah could no longer deny this truth. It was evident in every small kindness, every consideration, every moment when his eyes lingered on her face a moment longer than necessary. The question that haunted her sleepless hours was whether she could ever return such feelings, whether her heart, so thoroughly broken, could ever truly heal enough to love again. Morning brought clear skies and brilliant sunshine that transformed the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling wonderland. Hannah woke early, habit driving her toward the cookhouse to prepare breakfast for the hands who would be hungry after a night of checking cattle in the storm. She found Quinn already there, stoking the cookhouse stove to life. "Thought you might sleep in," he said by way of greeting. "Storm kept most folks awake." "Old habits," Hannah replied, automatically reaching for her apron hanging on its peg. "The men will be hungry." They worked side by side in comfortable silence, Hannah mixing biscuit dough while Quinn prepared coffee and sliced bacon. It struck her how natural it felt, this domestic partnership, as if they had been sharing mornings this way for years rather than hours. Martha appeared as breakfast was nearly ready, bringing with her a cheerful energy that dispelled any lingering awkwardness from the previous night's arrangements. "My goodness, but you two are efficient together," she observed, helping to set the table for the hands who would soon arrive. "Like you've been married for years." Hannah felt heat rise to her cheeks at Martha's casual comment, but before she could formulate a response, the bunkhouse door banged open and the ranch hands poured in, stomping snow from their boots and bringing with them tales of the night's adventures checking on cattle in the storm. The day passed quickly in storm-related tasks. Quinn and his men rode out to check on cattle in the more remote pastures, while Hannah and Martha tackled the mending that had been Martha's original reason for visiting the ranch. By late afternoon, the snow had begun to melt under the Texas sun, and the roads were passable again. "Tom will come for me at supper time," Martha said as she and Hannah finished the last of the mending. "He could take you home as well if you'd like." Hannah considered the offer. Her small house would be cold after being empty during the storm, the fire long dead. She would need to check on her animals, but Quinn had already sent one of his hands to feed them and ensure all was well. "Thank you, but I think I'll prepare supper for the men first," Hannah decided. "They've worked hard today in difficult conditions." Martha's knowing smile suggested she read more into the decision than mere conscientiousness, but she said nothing more on the subject. Instead, she helped Hannah begin supper preparations, then departed with her husband when he arrived with their wagon. "Think about Quinn's offer," Martha said as she hugged Hannah goodbye. "That foreman's cabin would save you a lot of hardship this winter." After the Hendersons left, Hannah found herself alone in the cookhouse, methodically preparing a hearty stew with dumplings that would fortify the men against the cold night ahead. The familiar tasks soothed her, allowing her mind to drift to the decision she faced. The practical advantages of accepting Quinn's offer were undeniable. The foreman's cabin would put her within easy reach of the cookhouse, eliminating the daily travel that would become increasingly difficult as winter progressed. She would still have her own space, her independence, while gaining security and convenience, but the personal implications were more complex. Moving to Quinn's ranch, even temporarily, would signal a deepening of their relationship and acknowledgement that she was allowing him into her life in a more significant way. Was she ready for that step? Hannah wasn't certain. The grief for William no longer consumed her as it once had, but the prospect of opening her heart to potential loss again was terrifying. And yet, the alternative, continuing to wall herself off from genuine connection, seemed increasingly hollow. Quinn and his men returned as dusk was falling, bringing with them the good news that the cattle had weathered the storm with minimal losses. They fell upon Hannah's stew with enthusiasm, their conversation revolving around predictions for the winter ahead and plans for managing the herd through the cold months. As the hands departed for the bunkhouse after the meal, Quinn lingered, helping Hannah clean up despite her protests that it wasn't necessary. "Wanted to speak with you," he said as he dried the last plate. "About the foreman's cabin." Hannah met his gaze steadily. "I've been thinking about your offer." Quinn nodded, his expression careful, neutral. "No pressure, just seems practical with winter setting in." "It is practical," Hannah agreed, But we both know it's more than that. Quinn set down the dish towel, his blue eyes serious as they held hers. Yes, he acknowledged simply. It is. The honesty in that single admission touched Hannah deeply. Here was a man who wouldn't hide behind pretense or manipulation, who respected her enough to acknowledge the unspoken currents between them. I'm not sure I'm ready for more, Hannah said carefully. My heart is still healing, Zach. It was the first time she had used his given name, and the significance wasn't lost on either of them. I know, he said quietly, and I'd never push for more than you're ready to give. But I also won't pretend that my feelings for you are purely neighborly. The simple declaration hung in the air between them, neither a demand nor a plea, merely a truth offered without expectation. I need time, Hannah said finally. Quinn nodded, his expression gentle. Time you shall have. The offer stands, regardless. The cabin is yours if you want it, no strings attached. His generosity, his willingness to accept her uncertainty without resentment, only deepened Hannah's confusion. This was a good man, perhaps the best man she had known since William. And yet the prospect of allowing herself to care for him, to truly open her heart again, filled her with a terror she couldn't quite articulate. Thank you, she said simply. I'll let you know my decision soon. Quinn nodded, accepting this as he accepted all her boundaries with grace and patience. I should get you home before it gets any later. Roads should be clear enough now. The ride back to her property was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The landscape was transformed by snow, familiar landmarks rendered strange and new in the moonlight. As they approached her small house, dark and silent in the night, Hannah felt a curious reluctance to return to her solitary existence. Quinn helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and sure at her waist. I'll get a fire started for you, he offered. House will be cold. Inside, he worked efficiently, building a fire in the cold hearth while Hannah lit lamps and checked that all was as she had left it. Within minutes, the small house began to warm, the familiar space welcoming her back. Thank you, Hannah said as Quinn prepared to leave, for everything. He stood by the door, hat in hand, his tall frame silhouetted against the night outside. You're welcome, Hannah, always. After he had gone, Hannah sat by the growing fire, watching the flames dance and flicker. The house felt emptier than usual, the silence more profound after the bustling life of Quinn's ranch. For the first time since coming to Trinity, Hannah felt truly lonely. The realization was startling. She had sought solitude, had wrapped it around herself like a protective cloak. Yet now, something in her rebelled against the emptiness, yearned for the warmth of human connection, specifically for the steady presence of Zachary Quinn. The following morning, Hannah rose early despite her disrupted night. After tending to her animals, she stood in her yard, looking out over the snow-covered landscape toward the north, where Quinn's ranch lay just beyond the horizon. The decision she had been wrestling with all night crystallized in that moment of clarity. It was time to stop hiding. Time to acknowledge that life continued, even after devastating loss. Time to accept that opening herself to new connections didn't diminish what she had shared with William, didn't betray his memory. By mid-morning, Hannah had packed what she would need for an extended stay and secured her house against her absence. The chickens could be moved to Quinn's ranch temporarily, and the cow would go to the Hendersons for the winter, as Martha had suggested. When Quinn arrived for his daily check, a habit he had maintained since the first days of their acquaintance, he found Hannah waiting on the porch, her carpet bag and trunk beside her. I'll accept your offer, she said simply. For the winter, at least. The joy that illuminated his face was worth any lingering doubts she might have harbored. You've made a practical decision, he said, though his eyes conveyed much more. Practical, Hannah agreed with the ghost of a smile. Mostly. The foreman's cabin proved to be more comfortable than Hannah had anticipated. Located a short walk from both the main house and the cookhouse, it offered privacy while keeping her connected to the life of the ranch. The single room was spacious enough for her few possessions, with a small porch that faced east to catch the morning sun. Quinn had clearly prepared for her potential acceptance. The cabin was clean, the bed made with fresh linens, the stove stocked with wood. A vase of dried wildflowers sat on the small table, a gesture so unexpected, so touching in its thoughtfulness, that Hannah found herself blinking back tears as she unpacked her belongings. Winter on the ranch established new patterns in Hannah's life. Her days were structured around meals for the hands, but she found time for her own pursuits as well, reading books from Quinn's extensive library, working on a quilt she had started in the fall, even experimenting with new recipes using the abundant provisions the ranch afforded. Most evenings, after the hands had been fed and the cookhouse cleaned, Hannah would join Quinn in the main house. Sometimes they played chess or cards. Sometimes they simply sat by the fire, reading or talking quietly about the day's events. Occasionally, Martha and Tom Henderson would join them, or Sheriff Mallory and his wife, or other neighbors who braved the winter roads for the pleasure of company. These gatherings were unlike any social events Hannah had known in Chicago. There was no pretense here, no elaborate etiquette to navigate. Just honest conversation, shared stories, and a genuine interest in each other's welfare. Hannah found herself gradually participating more, offering opinions, even laughing at Tom Henderson's outrageous tall tales. And always, there was Quinn, his steady presence both a comfort and an increasingly powerful attraction. Hannah couldn't pinpoint when exactly her feelings had shifted from cautious gratitude to something deeper, more complex. Perhaps it had been building all along, from those first days when he had shown up at her uncle's property with practical assistance and quiet respect. What she knew with certainty was that Zachary Quinn had awakened something in her that she had thought forever lost the capacity to see beauty in the world again, to find joy in simple moments, to imagine a future beyond mere survival. Yet still she hesitated to put a name to these feelings, to acknowledge them fully even to herself. The memory of William remained, not as painful now but still present, still significant. And the fear of loss, of having her heart shattered a second time, lingered like a shadow at the edges of her newfound contentment. Christmas approached, bringing with it preparations that engaged the entire ranch. Quinn's hands decorated the main house with greenery and ribbons, while Hannah baked traditional treats she hadn't attempted since before the fire. The scent of gingerbread and cinnamon filled the cookhouse, drawing appreciative comments from the men and a particularly warm smile from Quinn himself. "Haven't smelled Christmas baking like this since my mother was alive," he told her one evening as they sat by the fire, the ranch quiet after a day of preparation for the holiday feast planned for Christmas Day. "My husband was the baker in our family," Hannah said, the words coming more easily than she had expected. "He could create the most extraordinary pastries and breads. I learned by watching him." Quinn's expression was thoughtful as he studied her face in the firelight. "You speak of him more easily now." Hannah nodded, acknowledging the truth of his observation. "The pain has changed. It's still there, but it doesn't consume me as it once did." "That's as it should be," Quinn said quietly. "Grief changes shape over time, becomes something we can carry rather than something that carries us." The insight struck Hannah deeply. "Yes," she agreed softly. "That's exactly it." They sat in comfortable silence for a time, watching the flames dance in the hearth. Outside, Snow had begun to fall again, soft flakes drifting past the window in the light of the porch lantern. "I have something for you," Quinn said suddenly, rising from his chair. "Was going to wait until Christmas, but—" He crossed to his desk and returned with a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. Hannah accepted it with surprise. "But I haven't, no obligation," Quinn interrupted gently. "Just something I thought you might like to have." With careful fingers, Hannah unwrapped the package to reveal a small leather-bound journal, its cover soft with age and use. Opening it, she found pages filled with neat, precise handwriting observations about weather patterns, notes on plant species, sketches of local wildlife. "It was my father's," Quinn explained. "He kept records of everything he observed about this land, when certain flowers bloomed, when birds migrated, how the creek levels changed with the seasons. Thought it might interest you, given how closely you watch your garden and the natural cycles." The gift was so perfectly aligned with her interests, so thoughtfully chosen, that Hannah felt a swell of emotion too complex to name. "Zach, I can't accept something so personal, so valuable to your family." "You can," he said simply. "My father would have liked you, Hannah. Would have respected your determination, your connection to the land. He'd want his observations to be useful, not sitting in a drawer gathering dust." Hannah ran her fingers over the careful notations, the detailed drawings. "Thank you," she said finally, looking up to meet his gaze. "It's a wonderful gift." Something in that moment, perhaps the intimacy of the shared firelight, perhaps the meaning behind his gift, seemed to shift the air between them. Quinn's eyes, always expressive, held a warmth and longing that Hannah could no longer pretend not to see. "Hannah," he began, his voice low. But before he could continue, a sharp knock at the door broke the moment. One of the hands stood there, apologetic but urgent. A heifer was calving early in the north pasture. Having trouble needed Quinn's experienced hands. The interruption was perhaps fortunate, Hannah thought as Quinn grabbed his coat and hurried out into the snowy night. She wasn't sure she was ready for whatever he had been about to say, whatever declaration or question had been forming in that moment of connection. Back in her cabin later, Hannah sat on the edge of her bed, Quinn's father's journal open in her lap. The gift represented something significant, Quinn sharing not just his present but his past, his family heritage. It was an inclusion, an invitation to know him more deeply. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, the ranch blanketed in fresh snow that sparkled in the morning sunlight. Hannah rose early to prepare the feast they had planned: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and pies made from preserves put up during the summer. The hands who weren't needed for essential chores gathered in the main house, along with several neighboring families, including the Hendersons. The celebration was joyful, filled with music from a fiddle one of the hands played, stories shared around the table, and an abundance of food that Hannah took pride in providing. Throughout it all, she was aware of Quinn's presence, his quiet attention to ensuring everyone's comfort, his subtle glances in her direction when something particularly amusing was said. After the meal, as guests lingered over coffee and pie, Martha Henderson cornered Hannah in the kitchen. "You look happy," she observed, her tone conversational but her eyes sharp with perception. "Happier than when you first came to Trinity." Hannah couldn't deny the truth of this. "I am," she admitted. "I didn't expect to be, but I am." "It's a good thing," Martha said firmly. "Life is for the living, Hannah. We honor those we've lost by continuing to embrace what they would have wanted for us: joy, connection, love." The word love hung in the air between them, its implications both frightening and exhilarating. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that," Hannah said carefully. Martha's expression softened. "The heart has its own timeline, dear, but don't let fear rob you of what could be a beautiful second chapter." Before Hannah could respond, Quinn appeared in the doorway, his expression questioning as he took in their serious faces. "Everything all right?" "Just fine," Martha assured him with a knowing smile. "Just women's talk." The day continued with gift exchanges, small, thoughtful presents that reflected the practical nature of ranch life, but also the personal connections between those gathered. Hannah had managed, in the days leading up to Christmas, to create simple gifts for those she had come to consider friends: a knitted scarf for Martha, preserved fruit for the Mallorys, small sachets of dried herbs and flowers for the Hands. For Quinn, she had hesitated longest, wanting to find something that expressed her appreciation without presuming too much. In the end, she had baked a special loaf of bread using William's secret recipe, the one he had been most proud of, most protective of. It was a sharing of her past, her own version of what Quinn had done in giving her his father's journal. When she presented it to him privately, after the other guests had departed, and the Hands had returned to the bunkhouse, Quinn seemed to understand the significance immediately. "Your husband's recipe," he said, not a question but a recognition. Hannah nodded. "He would have said you earned it with all you've done for me." Quinn accepted the loaf with careful hands, as if it were made of something far more precious than flour and yeast. "Thank you," he said simply, but his eyes conveyed much more. They stood in the quiet kitchen, the house settling around them as the fire burned low in the hearth. Outside, stars glittered in a clear winter sky, their light reflecting off the snow to create a world of silver and shadow. "It's been a good day," Hannah said, reluctant to break the moment but aware of the lateness of the hour. "The best Christmas I've had in many years," Quinn agreed. Then, with a hesitation she rarely saw in him, he added, "Because of you, Hannah." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned as the man himself. Hannah felt the weight of it, the truth of it, and something within her shifted, like ice breaking up on a river at the first true thaw of spring. "Zach," she began, not knowing exactly what she wanted to say but feeling the need to respond to his openness with her own. Before she could continue, he took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "May I?" he asked, the question encompassing far more than the immediate moment. Hannah nodded, unable to find words for the conflicting emotions surging through her: fear and hope, past and future, memory and possibility. Zachary Quinn's kiss was gentle, almost reverent, his hand coming up to cradle her cheek with a tenderness that brought tears to Hannah's eyes. It was a kiss that asked nothing, demanded nothing, simply offered connection, affirmation, possibility. When they drew apart, Hannah saw in Quinn's face a mixture of joy and caution, happiness at what had just passed between them, but concern that it might have been too much, too soon. "I've wanted to do that since the Independence Day dance," he admitted with a small smile. "When you looked so beautiful in that blue dress, moving in my arms like you belonged there." The memory of that day, of the first time she had allowed herself to experience simple pleasure again, brought a warmth to Hannah's chest. "I felt something then too," she confessed. "It frightened me." Quinn nodded, understanding without explanation. "Fear is natural after loss. Doesn't make the feeling any less real." His perception, his patience, only deepened Hannah's growing certainty that this man was someone she could trust with her healing heart. Not a replacement for William, no one could ever be that, but a new beginning, a different kind of love born from different circumstances. "I should get back to my cabin," Hannah said finally, though part of her longed to stay in this moment, in the warmth of his presence. Quinn nodded, respecting her need for space to process what had happened between them. "I'll walk you." Outside, the night was still and cold, their breath forming clouds in the frosty air. Quinn offered his arm, and Hannah took it, grateful for his steadying presence as they navigated the snowy path to the foreman's cabin. At her door, he kissed her once more, briefly but with a promise of deeper feelings held in check. "Sleep well, Hannah." "Good night, Zach," she replied, her voice steadier than she had expected. Inside her cabin, Hannah sat on the edge of her bed, fingers touching her lips where the warmth of his kiss lingered. Something fundamental had changed tonight, a threshold crossed that could not be uncrossed. And despite the flutter of anxiety in her chest, Hannah found herself welcoming the change, embracing the possibility of a future she had thought forever closed to her. The winter days that followed Christmas brought a deepening of the connection between Hannah and Zach. Nothing was rushed. There were no grand declarations or dramatic gestures. Rather, there was a gradual, natural evolution of their relationship, longer conversations by the fire in the evenings, hands that found each other almost without conscious thought, shared glances that communicated without words. Quinn was patient, never pushing for more than Hannah was ready to give, content to let their connection develop at its own pace. Yet Hannah could sense the depth of his feelings in every consideration, every thoughtful gesture, every moment when his gaze lingered on her face with undisguised affection. January brought a bitter cold snap that kept everyone close to the ranch buildings. The hands focused on essential chores only, while Hannah found herself spending more time in the main house, working alongside Quinn on indoor tasks that had been neglected during busier seasons, mending tack, organizing records, planning for spring planting. These shared activities cemented their partnership, demonstrating how naturally they worked together, how their different strengths complemented each other. Hannah's meticulous attention to detail balanced Quinn's broader vision. His practical knowledge of the land enhanced her gardening plans. Her cooking skills blended with his understanding of what would sustain men through long days of physical labor. In the evenings, they would often read together by the fire, sometimes sharing passages that particularly struck them. Quinn introduced Hannah to the works of Walt Whitman and Ralph Waldo Emerson, while she shared her love of Jane Austen and Charles Dickens. Through these literary explorations, they discovered more about each other's minds, values, and perspectives on the world. As January gave way to February, bringing hints of the spring to come in slightly longer days and occasional warming trends, Hannah found herself thinking more often of her own property. She had visited regularly throughout the winter, checking that all remained secure, but she had not spent a night there since accepting Quinn's offer of the foreman's cabin. One mild afternoon, as they rode together to check on a section of fencing near her land, Hannah broached the subject. "I should be thinking about preparing my garden soon. The almanac suggests planting peas by early March." Quinn nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "You planning to move back then?" The question hung between them, seemingly simple but laden with significance. Hannah's answer would indicate much about how she viewed their relationship, their future. "I'm not sure," she admitted honestly. "The practical arrangements here have been convenient." "Convenient," Quinn repeated, a hint of humor in his tone. "Is that what we're calling it?" Hannah felt a blush rise to her cheeks despite the cool air. "You know, it's more than that." They had reached a rise that overlooked her property, the small house, the barn, the chicken coop, all standing empty yet maintained throughout the winter by Quinn's careful attention. From this vantage point, it looked almost like a miniature version of Quinn's ranch, a place of potential rather than completion. Quinn drew his horse to a stop, gazing out over the landscape. "What do you want, Hannah?" he asked directly. "For your future here?" The question was broad enough to encompass many possibilities, specific enough to require honest consideration. Hannah took her time, knowing that her answer would shape the path ahead for both of them. "When I came to Trinity," she began slowly, "all I wanted was a place to hide, to lick my wounds in private. I thought my life was effectively over, that all I could hope for was a quiet existence until whatever natural end awaited me." Quinn listened without interruption, his expression attentive but not demanding. "I never expected to find renewal here," Hannah continued. "Never thought I could feel interested in life again, let alone—" She hesitated, then made herself say the word that had been hovering in her mind for weeks. "Let alone love." Quinn's face remained still, but his eyes betrayed the impact of her words: hope, joy, and a deep, abiding tenderness. "So to answer your question," Hannah concluded, "I want a future that includes this land, this community. And you, Zach, if that's what you want too." The simplicity of her declaration seemed appropriate for this man who valued honesty above elaborate expressions. Quinn reached across the space between their horses, taking her gloved hand in his. "It's all I've wanted since the day you arrived in Trinity," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "To build a life with you, Hannah. To show you that there can be beauty and joy again, even after terrible loss." The truth of his words struck Hannah deeply. That was exactly what Quinn had done, from those first days of practical assistance to the quiet evenings by the fire. He had gradually, patiently shown her that life contained more than pain, that her heart could heal, that beauty existed if she would only open her eyes to see it. "You've already done that," she told him softly. "When I think of who I was when I stepped off that stagecoach and who I am now—" She shook her head, marveling at the transformation. "I scarcely recognize myself." "You were always strong," Quinn countered. "Just needed time to remember it." They rode back to the ranch in a companionable silence, each absorbed in thoughts of what had been acknowledged between them. That evening, after the hands had been fed and the cookhouse closed for the night, Quinn asked Hannah to walk with him despite the chilly February air. He led her to a small rise behind the main house, where a single oak tree stood silhouetted against the darkening sky. "My father planted this tree the day he married my mother," Quinn explained. "Said he wanted something that would grow alongside their life together, that would be here long after they were gone." Hannah leaned against the sturdy trunk, feeling the solid strength of it. "It's beautiful." "When I was a boy," Quinn continued, "I used to climb this tree to watch for my father coming home from cattle drives. Could see for miles from the upper branches." The image of a young Zach Quinn, eagerly watching the horizon for his father's return, touched Hannah deeply. There was something so fundamental about this connection to family, to place, to continuity. Quinn took both her hands in his expression serious in the fading light. "Hannah Downing, I love you, not in spite of your past or your pain, but including it, honoring it as part of who you are." The declaration was simple, direct, utterly sincere. Hannah felt tears spring to her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming recognition of how far she had come, how much had changed since she had arrived in Trinity, believing her capacity for love was buried alongside William. "I love you too, Zach," she said, the words feeling both monumental and completely natural. "You've shown me that my heart wasn't finished after all, just waiting." Quinn's smile transformed his face, erasing years of solitude and responsibility. "Then marry me," he said simply. "Be my wife, my partner in this life we've started building together." The proposal was so quintessentially Quinn, straightforward, honest, without pretense or manipulation. Hannah found herself laughing softly even as tears spilled over. "Yes," she answered. "Yes, I will." Quinn gathered her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the joy and promise of their shared future. Against the sturdy oak that had witnessed generations of Quinn family history, They sealed their commitment to creating their own chapter in that ongoing story. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it preparations not just for planting but for a wedding. The news of Hannah and Zach's engagement spread quickly through Trinity, met with universal approval and no small amount of satisfied comments about how people had seen it coming all along. Martha Henderson was particularly pleased, taking credit for her role in encouraging the relationship. "Knew from the start you two were meant for each other," she told Hannah as they discussed wedding plans over tea. "Just needed time to see it yourselves." The wedding was set for April, when the wildflowers would be at their peak in the pastures surrounding Quinn's ranch. Hannah found herself embracing the preparations with an enthusiasm that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. She worked on a special dress, accepted Martha's offer of heirloom lace for a veil, and collaborated with the women of Trinity on plans for the celebration that would follow the ceremony. Quinn, for his part, focused on preparing a home for his bride. Though Hannah had initially suggested they might divide their time between his ranch and her smaller property, Zach had a different vision. "What if we expanded the main house?" he proposed one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the spring twilight deepen. "Add a proper kitchen for you, more comfortable rooms for when we have guests. Make it truly ours, not just mine that you're joining." The suggestion touched Hannah deeply. It acknowledged that their union would be a true partnership, not simply Hannah being absorbed into Quinn's existing life. "I'd like that," she agreed. "Though my place could become a guest house," Quinn suggested. "Or maybe someday when we have children who are grown, they might want to start there, close enough for family but with their own space." The casual mention of children, a future family they might create together, brought both pain and hope to Hannah's heart. She had not allowed herself to think of motherhood since the stillbirth that had preceded William's death, had locked away that dream alongside so many others. Quinn, ever perceptive, noted her expression. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't mean to presume." "No," Hannah interrupted, reaching for his hand. "It's just, I was with child once before the fire. He came too early, didn't survive." Understanding and compassion filled Quinn's face. "Hannah, I'm so sorry. I never spoke of it," she continued. "Even to the women in Chicago who tried to comfort me after William died, it was too private, too painful." Quinn simply held her hand, offering his presence without pressing for more than she was ready to share. The thought of trying again, of risking that loss. Hannah's voice faltered. "We don't have to decide anything now," Quinn assured her. "Whatever our family looks like, just the two of us or more, it will be enough. You are enough, Hannah." His unconditional acceptance, his willingness to build a future based on what was possible rather than fixed expectations, reinforced Hannah's certainty that this man, this relationship, was unlike anything she had known before. Different from her first love, but no less profound for being born of maturity and shared understanding rather than youthful passion. As April approached, Quinn's expanded house plans became reality. Local craftsmen worked alongside the ranch hands to add new rooms to the main house, including a spacious kitchen that would be Hannah's domain. Quinn consulted her on every decision, from the placement of windows to ensure good light for cooking to the height of shelves for her comfort. Hannah divided her time between overseeing these renovations and preparing both her garden and Quinn's for spring planting. The work was physically demanding but deeply satisfying, connecting her to the rhythms of the land in ways she had only begun to appreciate during her first partial year in Trinity. One particularly fine April morning, a week before their planned wedding, Hannah rose early and felt drawn to visit her own property. The sun was just beginning to color the eastern horizon as she saddled the gentle mare Quinn had given her for Christmas, a beautiful sorrel with a white star on her forehead. The ride to her uncle's, her property, took only 20 minutes at a leisurely pace. As she approached the small house, Hannah was struck by how differently she viewed it now compared to that first day when Quinn had brought her here, a stranger in a strange land. Then, it had represented only necessity, shelter, survival, a place to hide from the world. Now, she saw its potential, its place in the larger tapestry of the life she and Quinn were creating together. Dismounting, Hannah walked around the property, noting the signs of spring renewal, green shoots emerging in what had been her garden, wildflowers dotting the pasture, birds building nests in the eaves of the barn. Life continuing, persisting, flourishing despite winter's hardships. She sat on the porch steps, watching the sun rise fully above the horizon, painting the landscape in gold and amber. In this peaceful moment, Hannah felt a sense of completion, of cycles coming full circle. When she had arrived in Trinity, her eyes had seen only suffering, the reflection of her own pain in everything around her. Now, those same eyes could perceive beauty again in a sunrise, in wildflowers, in the face of the man who had patiently shown her the way back to life. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. Zach Quinn rode toward her, his figure familiar and beloved against the morning sky. Of course he had known where to find her, had understood her need for this pilgrimage before their wedding. "Morning," he called as he drew closer. "Hope you don't mind the company." Hannah smiled, her heart full. "I was hoping you'd come." Quinn dismounted and joined her on the porch steps, his arms settling comfortably around her shoulders. Together they sat in companionable silence, watching the day brighten around them. "I was just thinking," Hannah said finally, "about how different everything looks to me now. This land, this house, my future." Quinn nodded, understanding as always. Amazing what a change of perspective can do. Hannah turned to look at him, this man who had become the center of her new life, who had shown her patience and kindness when she needed it most. "Thank you," she said simply, "for helping me see the world differently." Quinn's smile was gentle, his blue eyes warm with love. "We helped each other, Hannah. That's what partners do." A week later, on a perfect April afternoon with wildflowers carpeting the pastures in blue and yellow and white, Hannah Downing became Hannah Quinn beneath the oak tree that had witnessed generations of Quinn family history. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful, attended by the entire population of Trinity and surrounding farms. Hannah wore a dress of cream-colored silk, adorned with Martha's heirloom lace. Zach stood tall and proud in a new suit, his usually weathered face softened by the joy of the moment. They spoke vows they had written themselves, promises of partnership, respect, and abiding love through whatever challenges life might bring. As Judge Simmons pronounced them husband and wife, and Zach leaned down to seal their union with a kiss, Hannah felt the final pieces of her healing heart lock into place. This was not an ending but a beginning, a second chance at love, at family, at building a meaningful life. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music and dancing, abundant food, and the warm fellowship of a community that had embraced Hannah as one of their own. As twilight deepened into night, the newlyweds slipped away to the newly renovated main house, their home now, truly theirs together. Later, as they stood on the porch watching stars emerge in the vast Texas sky, Zach wrapped his arms around Hannah from behind, his chin resting lightly on her head. "Happy?" he asked softly. Hannah leaned back against his solid strength, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. "Yes," she answered truthfully. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again." "That's all I wanted," Zach said, his voice rough with emotion. "From the first day, when I saw you step down from that stagecoach with such sadness in your eyes, I just wanted to show you that there was still beauty in the world, still reason to believe in goodness." Hannah turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his beloved face. "You did that and more, Zach Quinn. You gave me back myself." As they stood together under the stars that had witnessed countless human stories of love and loss, joy and sorrow, Hannah knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged in this place. With this man, building a future neither of them could have imagined when fate first brought them together. Her eyes, which had once seen only suffering, now beheld the beauty of possibility. And in Zachary Quinn's steadfast love, Hannah had found not just healing but transformation, a second life more rich and meaningful for having known the depths of grief and the heights of renewed hope. Together, they entered their home, closing the door on the past and stepping forward into the promise of all the days to come.